Some betrayals don't happen all at once. They unfold slowly, hidden inside trust, routine, and familiarity. A parent, a partner, a protector, a voice people relied on. In these cases, the danger wasn't outside the room. It was woven into daily life. Names were real. Histories were not. And by the time the truth surfaced, years had already been rewritten. This video explores 5 true stories where identity itself became the deception. The man who betrayed his own family. For decades, Jack Barsky lived an ordinary life. He worked steady jobs. He paid taxes. He raised children. Nothing about his routine suggested deception. The name he used belonged to a real American child who had died years earlier. Barsky assumed that identity in the late 1970s after entering the United States illegally. He was not an opportunist. He was a trained intelligence operative recruited by East Germany's Foreign Intelligence Service during the Cold War. His assignment was not sabotage or violence. It was long-term presence. Blend in, remain unnoticed, stay. Barsky studied American life carefully. He learned how people spoke, worked, and socialized. He built a paper trail slowly, filling gaps only when necessary. The identity he used allowed him to pass background checks and move forward without attracting attention. Over time, his role as a spy faded. The Cold War weakened. East Germany began to collapse. Barsky did not leave. He married. He had children. He built a family that believed they knew him completely. At home, there were no secret meetings or coded messages. There was school, work, and routine. His family life was real, even if the foundation beneath it was not. Contact with intelligence handlers ended. The mission dissolved. The identity remained. Years passed without suspicion. The deception might have stayed buried if not for outside intervention. In the late 1990s, U.S. intelligence agencies received information pointing to a long-dormant foreign operative living quietly inside the country. Investigators noticed inconsistencies in identity records and followed the trail. Barsky was contacted by the FBI. He cooperated. The truth emerged slowly, first through official channels, then inside his home. His wife and children did not discover the deception through behavior or conflict. They learned it from investigators. The realization was not that the man they loved had disappeared. It was that, on paper, he had never existed. Every document, every origin story, every official record tied to him had been constructed before they met him. Barsky was not imprisoned. His cooperation and the political context mattered. The personal consequences did not disappear. Trust had to be reevaluated, memories reinterpreted, years of shared history suddenly reframed. The betrayal was not loud or violent. It was quiet, consistent, and close enough to feel permanent. By the time the truth surfaced, the life built on it was already complete. The next deception didn't require a shared life, only belief. She only existed when he was alone. Paul Frampton was a respected physicist. He taught at universities. He published research. He lived a structured, predictable life. Nothing about his career suggested risk. In 2011, Frampton began an online relationship with a woman he believed was a business executive. She was younger. She was attentive. She showed interest in his work and his life. Their communication was frequent and personal. The relationship existed almost entirely online. Photos were shared. Messages were exchanged. Plans were discussed. They never met in person. Over time, the relationship became more urgent. The woman described travel problems. She described financial complications. Eventually, she asked Frampton to help. She asked him to fly to Argentina and carry luggage for her, claiming it contained personal belongings she could not transport herself. Frampton agreed. In January 2012, he arrived at Buenos Aires airport carrying 2 suitcases provided to him shortly before his flight. Customs officials searched the bags. Inside were nearly 6 kilograms of cocaine. Frampton was arrested immediately. He maintained that he had no knowledge of the contents. He insisted he had been manipulated. Investigators examined his communications. The woman he believed he knew did not exist. Her identity had been constructed. Her photos were stolen. Her personal history was fabricated. The relationship had been real only on one side. Frampton was charged and later convicted of drug trafficking. In court, the online relationship was presented as evidence of grooming and deception. The judge acknowledged the manipulation but upheld the sentence. Frampton served years in prison. The woman was never identified. No arrest followed. What unraveled was not just a crime, but a realization. The relationship had functioned only in isolation. It existed in messages and images, never in shared space. No one in Frampton's offline life had met her. No record of her appeared outside his communications. She vanished as completely as she had appeared. The illusion ended. The consequences did not. The next case didn't rely on illusion, but authority. The protector who was the threat. Robert Hendy-Freegard presented himself as someone who could keep people safe. He spoke calmly. He projected authority. He claimed connections to intelligence services. To those he targeted, he appeared knowledgeable and controlled. He approached victims individually, often young people, and told them they were in danger. He said criminal organizations were watching them, that they were at risk of kidnapping or harm. The threat was always external. He positioned himself as the solution. He convinced victims that secrecy was necessary for their safety. They were told to cut contact with friends and family, to move frequently, to trust only him. Isolation came first, then dependence. Victims were asked to hand over money for protection. Some were encouraged to take jobs chosen by him. Others were told to abandon studies or careers. The control was gradual. There was no single moment where everything changed. The rules tightened over time. Hendy-Freegard monitored communications. He dictated schedules. He framed disobedience as danger. Those under his influence believed they were being protected. Outsiders saw something else. Families noticed sudden disappearances. Friends received brief, scripted messages before contact stopped entirely. Police reports were filed, often with little progress. The deception lasted years. In the early 2000s, investigators began to connect cases involving multiple victims who described the same pattern of control. The intelligence claims were false. There was no threat. There was no organization watching them. The danger had been singular. Hendy-Freegard was arrested and charged with multiple offenses, including kidnapping and fraud. In court, victims described the same experience despite never knowing each other, the same warnings, the same instructions, the same fear. He was convicted. Some victims rebuilt their lives. Others struggled to reconnect with families they had been separated from for years. What remained difficult to explain was how long the control lasted without force. There were no locked doors, no restraints, only authority, repeated often enough to feel real. The structure collapsed when the truth surfaced. For those inside it, the damage was already done. The next truth wasn't hidden by a stranger, but by family. The childhood that was carefully edited. Alexandra Stevenson grew up believing her life followed a simple story. She was raised by her mother. She knew who her family was. Nothing suggested anything had been hidden. She trained as a tennis player from a young age. Her talent was obvious. Her career progressed in public view. What remained private was her origin. For years, Stevenson was unaware that her biological father was Julius Irving. The decision to keep that information from her was made before she could question it. Adults around her believed secrecy was protection. There were no forged documents, no false names, just an omission. As Stevenson's tennis career advanced, public interest grew, media attention intensified, questions followed. Eventually, the truth surfaced, not through family discussion, through reporting. Stevenson learned that a major part of her identity had been intentionally withheld. The relationship had existed, support had been provided privately, but acknowledgement had not. The revelation did not undo her childhood. It reframed it. Moments once seen as ordinary were reconsidered. Absences gained context. Silence took on meaning. There was no criminal act, no confrontation that resolved everything, just the realization that a personal history can be shaped by what is left unsaid. The truth did not arrive suddenly. It had been there all along, only edited out. The final story involves no false identity, only a borrowed one. She borrowed someone else's tragedy. After September 11th, 2001, survivors gathered to share what they had lived through. Among them was a woman who spoke clearly and often. She described escaping the South Tower. She described injuries. She described loss. Her name was Tania Head. She became a familiar presence at memorials. She joined survivor groups. She was trusted. Her story was detailed, specific, consistent. She spoke about where she had been inside the tower, about the man she said she was engaged to who had died that day. No one questioned her at first. Survivors rarely do. Over time, inconsistencies emerged. Names did not align with records. Employment histories did not match. Details shifted when checked. Journalists began asking questions. Records showed that Tania Head had not been in New York on September 11th. She had not worked in the World Trade Center. The fiancé she described did not exist. There was no evidence she had been there at all. Confronted with the findings, Head disappeared from public view. There were no charges, no trial. What followed was quieter. Survivors reassessed shared memories. Moments of trust were reconsidered. Grief was complicated by realization. The tragedy she spoke about was real. It just did not belong to her. And once the truth surfaced, the voice that had carried it vanished.